everyone. I have an amazing founder here, Hilmar. Thanks a lot for making the time to be here.
Thank you, sir.
I'm curious, what's your origin story into crypto?
When I was 14, 15, I was trading stock options on the German DAX, the S&P 500 of Germany. Yeah, so I was always into that kind of stuff, and then decided to study finance because that was my interest, but it was like post-financial crisis era, and I just couldn't see myself working in a bank or a hedge fund or something like that in the traditional financial industry, and so I was just sitting there. I was super interested in this stuff. I was like, damn, what should I do after my studies? I didn't know. I didn't want to join these companies that everyone else was joining after my university. So luckily, at some point, I discovered crypto. And I had a very strong interest in tech always. And then crypto came along, and when I really swallowed the pill was when the DAO happened. So the DAO in 2016. I read about it and I was completely fascinated by the possibility to create companies globally without like having to adhere to a local registration, go to notaries and just like collaborate on the internet. And then I participated in the DAO and the DAO got rugged. And I was like, okay, this is crazy. I need to learn more about it. And then I just from then went straight in and then did nothing else and just like teaching myself how to build smart contracts, researching, going to hackathons. And then this led eventually to us founding Gelato.
Yeah. So tell me about the vision for Gelato when you first got it started.
Actually went a fairly practical approach. We went to hackathons and we were building applications like interest rate swaps in like 2019 between ETHLand, which is now Aave, and MakerDAO, at like some ETH hackathons. And then we always realized when we were building these more sophisticated financial applications that we always needed to like build and run our own centralized backend infrastructure to automate smart contracts, for example, because smart contracts they're not that smart actually, right? If you want to execute them at some future conditional time, then you need these sort of external agents to the system that actually facilitate the transactions for users and then conduct them on chain. We realized, hey, there's this need, and then we talked to a bunch of projects like Gnosis in Berlin. They wanted to build an application and they had a similar issue, and then they said, hey, why can't we give you guys a grant and you sort of build this sort of like automation for us for our Dutch auction protocol that they were building back then. And we said, okay, and then we got some grants from them, and then we built the first version of Gelato, so to say, which was very specific. But while we were building that, we were like, why can't we like generalize this part and this part? And then will there be more DEXs? And then we sort of thought about it.
At that juncture, what was the language that you guys were aligning on? Like, this is what needs to be done when you were trying to solve the problem of the Dutch auction automation. What was it that was lacking?
The solution was basically, in order to execute conditional transactions on public EVM blockchains like Ethereum, you need to build external servers, they were called keepers back then, to monitor conditions off-chain and then send transactions at the right time on-chain. And you want to do it in a decentralized way where you are not the only party that is hosting the server, but you can build a ready-made decentralized network, which basically means if one node goes down, your application is still served, and these auctions still go through. And that was like the problem statement that we had, and we had to solve it.
Yeah, makes sense. Then you realized, okay, well, smart contracts can be programmed, but they can't be automated. That's a pretty bad deal. And keepers, you can say, I will always be there to do it, but that's not going to be reliable. Let's decentralize and have an automation feature. So that seems like that was the onset. And then if you were to say at that moment, okay, 5 years from now we're going to be X, what would that be at that time? Kind of a tough sort of memory lane question.
Let's first build this general automation protocol that focuses solely on chain, on one chain. Then let's expand to more chains. And then once we have like a reliable system there, then let's go and connect it to the off-chain world. And this is actually what we now started at the end of last year with our newest service called Web3 Functions, which is basically like decentralized cloud functions that connect the off-chain and on-chain world. And so we had this sort of vision, and we're still kind of like on the path there. So it's actually nothing too much has changed.
I see. And in that vision, how does the Oracle as a type of entity or project feed into that vision?
So basically, Gelato nodes they were always sort of Oracle nodes, and automation oracles is the same thing, just from a different side, I would say. You will have, like, my hypothesis is that you will have one middleware layer of what in the Web2 world are like cloud services, like the AWS, Google Cloud, and so on. But all these services on top of there But you will have the same for Web3, which basically includes off-chain data, oracles, on-chain automation, transaction relaying, and all these kind of stuff. So for me, this is one system that will be built. And I think it hasn't been figured out yet what's the best way of actually doing that. Everything is a bit limited and isolated right now. And with our newest approach, what we try to do is we try to basically merge automation and oracles in such a way where you have like super flexible oracles that connect your smart contracts to the real world, and so this is our approach.
I see. Great. So in your journey, what are some of the challenges that you've faced where you're like, this is gonna take a super long time to figure out, but now you have a solution? Or this could make or break us really if I don't come up with, or if we don't come up with the right approach. That maybe are learnings that other founders could leverage.
Yeah, I think one major learning that we went through is because especially for infrastructure startups, you're building a general purpose solution most of the time, right? And the problem, for me, the danger with this is always that you don't pay sufficient attention to the applications that actually use your infrastructure and what their needs are. So basically, like, why do you need that infrastructure in the first place, right? And so we started off with this vision. Like, we had a couple of projects that we did, and we realized, okay, they all need this infrastructure, so let's build that infrastructure. Yeah. But then we went out and like locked ourselves down for 6 months, and we, Louise and myself, we were no funding back then, just grants from like Gnosis and Metacartel. And we like built for like 6 months this smart contract protocol that can serve all these different edge cases, and it's like super general purpose. And we deployed it and we audited it and we were super happy about it. And then it was there. And we spent like 6 months building it and releasing it. And then it was so tough to integrate. It was like so general. And like we went to projects and some of them integrated this, but it took them like weeks. Yeah. Because it was all on chain, and they're like, I have to build a smart contract now here, and we have to audit it before we put it into production. And I'm like, oh shit, will every integration take that long? Yeah. And so what we then did is, okay, let's go back and say, where are we now as an industry? Back then it was like mostly tradings, the first lending protocols came out, and LPing on AMMs. And so we said, okay, what are the 3 main use cases? Trading, lending, LPing. Let's build into like building smart contracts and specific infrastructure for all these use cases. Let's build that, and then from there work backwards to then build our general protocol or general purpose infrastructure system that we want to have. Yeah.
But in a way, drop everything you did before, waste the 6 months.
Yeah, basically, like we spent like half a year building this general purpose smart contract protocol, which we then completely scrapped. Yeah. And said, okay, let's just have the lightest.
Something that works now.
Yeah, to just have the lightest on-chain protocol whatsoever. It's like the most light. It's literally a diamond proxy that we use. It's just like basically a smart contract that can just change every day if we needed to. Then we built like these custom services to try out, okay, what is the best way from a backend perspective to handle limit orders? What is the best way to handle lending? What is like liquidation protection stuff? What's the best way to handle automated LPing? Yeah. And then from there, we had all these learnings, and then from there we were able to translate it into an infrastructure client that is the Gelato sort of client now, that was able to service all of them, and then it really easily translated into yield farming, and like Yearn or Beefy using it, or conditional trading, or NFT lending, or all these other use cases that now leverage Gelato, and it all worked very nicely from there, because we sort of built these applications ourselves on top of Gelato, realized all the pains, and then we're able to build a much better infrastructure.
Yeah. So comparing 6 months versus app-specific or let's say use-case-specific implementations, then generalizing, what's sort of the time cost difference there?
I always try to be my own customer, so I'm always building applications on top of Gelato. I try to make them as small and POC as possible, because sometimes, unfortunately, but sometimes we are in such a young, like a nascent space, that sometimes your small POCs turn into like real big projects. Yeah. And they could be something that you pursue, and then like, hey, you don't want to be distracted from your actual mission. That's why keep them small, but keep building on yourself. Otherwise, you will lose touch with what the infrastructure is actually meant to be. Yeah. From my perspective.
I hear you. So the learning there is build with the user then, rather than come up with a grand plan, lock yourself up, and hope it'll be used.
So eat your own dog food, A, and B, let's not kid ourselves, like, there are not that, like, Web3 is still nascent, right? And there are not that many users right now. We need to grow the space like a 10x, 100x still from like the amount of projects that will come in, then it all makes sense. Like, really iterate fast, you sort of need to also be your user, otherwise you always rely on external feedback from other people. And so we always say we are our own users by default, and then we can just like go really crazy.
What about product build out lifecycle kind of idea? Like, go where the customers are right now, get immediate feedback, even just give yourself the feedback by eating your own dog food. I get that. Are there elements that you figured out around decentralization that are, you went down a path and then realized that wasn't good and came back and now you're pretty confident with the model? Or about talent, about compliance, anything else? Any other learnings you'd like to share?
Well, I think in Web3 especially, you always have that notion of, hey, we want to build a decentralized X.
Yeah.
Or we want to build a decentralized Y. And what our approach was at the very beginning is like, let's find out if X and Y is actually what people need, if it's decentralized or not, right? Decentralization is not a feature. Like, it's not something that will suddenly get people to use it. You need some other things as well. A reliable client that we run ourselves in like the first 2 years or so, and just see if people actually want smart contract automation. Is that really what you need? And you want reliability, you want scalability, and it was trusted, because we were only focused on on-chain data. It was trustless, so they didn't need to trust us for sending any data. So it was kind of fine that we were running it ourselves at the beginning. And then we realized, okay, that's a really big issue and people really need it. And then we said, okay, now we have validated it, let's now decentralize it later on. Whereas spending, because building a reliably centralized sustainable network takes a lot of resources. And once you do this, it's very hard to go back. Because then you committed to incentive schemes and have people running your implementation, then you just change the next day. So what's the step? The step is, we always said, this is a decentralized network we are building. Our goal is to be able in 6 years to shut down the company and leave. And then it runs. And we want to be as close to Ethereum from like the trust level as possible. And so we always built with that in mind. So to do it was just like, okay, now we need to go deep into non-customer problem related things, like, okay, how can we build a reliable peer-to-peer network, how we can build algorithms that determine how many transactions you can execute based on the stake you have in the system, and all these sort of things. And then how can we onboard node operators? We already had like investors that were node operators back then, because we said, hey, let's already get commitments by them, so they're already in our ecosystem, and then they can be running this stuff very easily. And so it's just a matter of prioritization. So I have 20 engineers in the team, and we just had to, at some point, we had to make the switch and say, okay, rather than only focusing on the customer problems on hand of the problem that we are solving, let's now divert resources from that and go into, okay, building this decentralized permissionless system. And that was like, at the beginning I wasn't comfortable with that, because I'm like, we need to solve these problems first before we spend resources on that. And now we solve these, and now we last year started investing resources in that, and now we already have a peer-to-peer system, node operators running it, but it's a gradual process, right? It's like the light version now, and hopefully like in a year or two we can have like a fully permissionless system.
What does that look like 2 years from now? In the fully permissionless system, Gelato's great, you're one step close, you're just in it for kicks basically, you can wrap up the company and close it down.
You have these L2s, you have these L1s like Ethereum, and Gelato is this sort of module that you can just plug into every of these
L1 or L2.
It's like a plugin. It's like, hey, does your chain support, like, does it use Gelato as a plugin? Yes? Okay, cool, I can easily deploy I don't have to host any server-side infrastructure. I can just like point Gelato to an IPFS hash that has all my logic encoded that they need to run, and then I get the security of Ethereum with the security of the Gelato network, with something like EigenLayer, for example, that have to have the most trust minimized off-chain computation that's available, and it's just out of the box for every major sort of blockchain ecosystem or framework that you have. And it's not only us running, it's also other ecosystems like Ethereum nodes, for example, running our client. And it's just like a default that you use. It's like a modular piece that you put into blockchains. And that's how we see it. And then so many people run it, and it's like
part of the background.
And it's just part of it, and you don't even think about it anymore.
And then they get additional gel tokens maybe in reward.
Yeah, they have to stake gel. Of course, there's revenue because like it's basically like AWS, right? We run computation for you. This computation is costly. You need to pay for the computation, and yeah, this goes to the nodes.
Yeah, I hear you. So building the X before decentralization is another learning. Wonderful. Anything else you'd like to share with founders?
A million things, but I think the most important one is don't get confused with the hype. Only because your competitors are building one thing doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah.
Don't get obsessed over them, because like this space is very competitive. Focus on the users and talk to them and build relationships. And for me, it's also to show that you're really in it for the industry, for Web3, to realizing this. And we are building ourselves, like always on top with experimentation, and show that, hey, we are also builders. We're not just just don't want to make money off other projects and don't care. Like, we really care about it. And I think that translates to good relationships with projects, and then integrations, and then more usage. So
great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hilmar. Appreciate all your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.